There we go. Yes. This is our next to last meeting of the year, and we're going to focus on the Upper Basin today. And at the end of this meeting, we're going to talk a little bit about the next meeting. Our friends at the Rappahannock folks have got some exciting stuff going on that they want to tell us about at the next meeting. And we're still trying to figure out how we're going to do the last commission meeting of the year. The chairman really wants us to be in person. I'm negotiating with the folks at Meadow Event Park if we can get one of their bigger venues without it being too expensive, so that everybody can spread out, which means we've probably got to have microphones, which just makes it more expensive. So we may be Zooming and have no in-person meetings at all this year. But that is not the chairman's first choice. And so we're still trying to work at that. And John McCarthy, our latest arrival, will be landing in. Okay, with that, Michelle, are you ready to share your screen and tell us about all your great work on the Watershed Management Plan?
Yes.
Take it away.
Oh, there we go. Okay. So yes, we have been working on this since the WIP 3 effort, and just to remind everybody, this is our PDC region, and the yellow is where the Upper Rappahannock watershed flows. But even though we are going to have, the watershed layer where people can overlay to just focus on the Upper Rappahannock, we are going to provide our data for the whole PDC region for the ease of our counties who don't care as much about the watershed boundaries necessarily. Let's see. So when we did our WIP 3 effort here in the PDC, it came to our notice that lack of comprehensive GIS data was a major issue that was hampering all of our Chesapeake Bay efforts. Not only do several of our localities not have GIS capabilities or have very minimal GIS capabilities, a lot, even our localities that have GIS, strong GIS departments, didn't have their data in GIS, like stormwater BMP data. A lot of the state data was not in GIS. And the data was scattered all amongst various state, federal, and local governments, as well as nonprofits. There was no clearinghouse for any of this data. So when it came to planning where we're going to have BMPs within the WIP or other watershed efforts, it was very difficult because we don't know where the BMPs are now. We had numbers of BMPs from DEQ, but where they were on the landscape was anybody's guess. And even when it came to other base layers, like stream data, floodplain data, all of that information was just scattered everywhere. So we thought it would be helpful for people to be able to visualize and overlay those things to make better decisions, because right now, those implementing our BMPs for the Bay program, whether it be Friends of the Rappahannock or Department of Forestry, it's really happening according to who comes to sign up rather than a concerted effort of this is where we want to target for the most part. And certainly things like the Friends of the Rappahannock report card do help target, but this is a much more fine grained look at this. And also we noticed that there are BMP data gaps, specifically with stormwater management, since many of our localities have opted out of having their own stormwater programs, opting instead to have DEQ administer the programs. We noticed that several of our localities, most of our localities, had less stormwater data than they had when we did WIP 2. So that kind of fell by the wayside when DEQ took over. So for phase 1, we have really been focused on data gathering, gathering existing data from our partners, and I'll go through all of the data input sets that we have been looking at. So gathering data from all of the state and local partners, nonprofits, et cetera. We worked with our Land Use and Environment Committee to determine what those data inputs would be, what kinds of data sets people wanted to see for planning purposes. And then it became necessary to negotiate data sharing MOUs, which has been problematic at best. This is really where we've had the most issues through the whole process. We have not been able to get NRCS data. That is kind of just a black hole. No, but they will not share their data with anyone. Department of Forestry is the same thing because of NRCS data. We have been able to get data sharing MOUs with the Smithsonian Conservation Biology Institute and with DCR for their ag BMP data, not including the NRCS data, but it's been problematic. Even with the DCR MOU, the soil and water conservation districts have refused to sign. So John Marshall and Culpeper Soil and Water Conservation District boards voted not to share the MOU. I assume because they think they already, have their own BMP data for their region. So what's the point of having it for the whole watershed? But that makes planning at the watershed scale and having meaningful discussions very difficult. And when we enter phase 2, that will be, and if Deirdre, if you have any insight in this, please feel free to chime in.
I didn't want to interrupt, but we did discuss this a couple of times at a couple of board meetings. Part of the problem was a private financial data associated with those databases that relates directly back to the landowner. That is, tax information, things of that nature. That we have an agreement with the landowner not to share. So therefore, one legal agreement kind of subverts your need for that information because of the way the data is entered. I mean, if we had the time and the expert, let's just say the time and the personnel to extract information, we could do that, but we can't.
So that then is a confusion as to how DCR approached you all about it, because they're giving us the data. We already have much of the data. It's just a matter of whether you can see it, not whether we can see it, but whether you can see it from other soil and water conservation, from Culpeper. So you would see Culpeper's, not, we already have it. It's a matter of you being allowed to have it and discuss it, not have it per se. I mean, although that will be an issue, but even just being able to be included in the meetings and review the data to be able to give input. So at this point, the soil and water conservation districts cannot be included in meetings where we're looking at this data together.
Michelle, can I ask a clarifying question? The data you get from DCR, is it scrubbed of that confidential financial information before you get it?
We have asked that it would be, but so far it has not been. It's certainly nothing. When we provide that data to our partners and in the watershed plan, it will have no identifying information. The MOU specifically states that we will not share any of that information. So it would,
That may be,
that financial, that is already addressed in that is already addressed in the MOU, that we're not allowed to share any of that financial or identifying information with others.
well, that may be the case. However, regardless of how you are sharing the data and how DCR presented the data to you all, we cannot, it would be a violation of our agreement with the landowner if we were to participate in any fashion in something that provided data to any other third party. So we are not going to compromise our relationship with our landowner, mainly because our goal is similar to what you're trying to accomplish, but it would be sort of a second party agreement that I'm sure most of our landowners would see as a subversion of our agreement with them. Does that make sense?
I understand what you're saying, but yeah, I mean, I don't want to get into it.
No, I know. And I
Go
don't know
down
what
that
DCR
rabbit hole, but yes, I mean, essentially, yeah, we've worked out this agreement with the AG's office. So this is what
Mhm.
I consider to be legal, given the agreements that you have with your landowners. And it just
Right.
allows all of the parties involved to be able to discuss the water
Right.
plan and make sure that it's accurate before we release it. So at this,
And I understand that.
yeah,
And
so
I
at
would
this,
love to attend some of those meetings, as you know, but perception being 99% of the situation between the districts and the landowners, I'm sure you can appreciate our position.
so yeah, I mean, essentially what it means is that only the people who have signed the MOUs can receive that ag BMP data and be able to weigh in. So we've had a number of localities and nonprofit organizations sign on, so they would be able to receive the watershed plan and be able to provide input on it. So yes, it's problematic, as we've said, that the soil and water conservation districts can't be involved in the ag BMP data set discussions or receive the ag BMP data, but you know, the nonprofits can and the localities can. It's a little heartbreaking, but it is what it is. So anyway, we are then mapping all of the data as we receive it within GIS. We have staff here who have been working on that. Also, some of the agencies themselves have mapped the data for us, like Smithsonian Conservation Biology Institute went through and did a lot of work on their own before providing it to us. So that is something that's been ongoing as we receive the data. And again, the goal to all of this is to better prioritize BMP implementation by all of our partners. This is something that our partners asked for within the WIP process. Okay, so this is half of the data sources. The next slide will have the rest of them. And all of these things are on this screen are ones that we already have and have been digitized into GIS. You see the data type and the data sources. We have, you know, parcel data, building footprint, street center lines, sewer service areas, on and on, your typical base layers, including land cover data. And then we get into more of things like conservation easements and recreation sites, going down through some of the stream data and impaired streams and permitted point source discharges. So these will be more of our base layers that other things get overlaid onto. Okay, so then this is really where the meat of our efforts have been. The blue are things that we have partial data for or are in progress, and the red are things that we have not been able to get as of late. The forestry data, as I mentioned, is something we're not going to have access to And that is something DOF has said is because of their relationship with NRCS. Stormwater BMPs is something that we've been working on with our localities to complete. We have a lot of the historical data. It's been more of an issue of getting more recent data since they've opted out, especially since the pandemic kind of shortchanged everything. A lot of our localities have lost staff, and their focus has been obviously on the pandemic response. So it's been slow going, but we are progressing on that. We got our the septic BMP data from Department of Health early on. So that's very good because that had been a big roadblock in the past. I mentioned the Ag BMP data. We have the wetland mitigation bank data from Army Corps. The riparian buffer data we are going to be getting through our phase 2 efforts through our NIFWIF grant that we received, and I'll talk about that in a bit. Monitoring station data we have and the water chemistry data is included in that. The stream flow data we are getting from USGS. Actually, I think that is something that we have. We just need to go through it. We received a bunch of USGS data as part of an agreement with the Smithsonian Conservation Biology Institute, because that is part of their online data suite that they have. So that has been a really good partnership because they have land change data that we've been utilizing to project with some of the population data that we've received from Kevin Burns. Also DCR endangered species data and fish passage, trout streams, all of that from VDGIF, which I guess what are they called now? I know they have a new name. I can't remember. I need to update this, but does anybody have any questions?
Wildlife Resources.
Yes, Department of Wildlife
Department of Wildlife Resources. Yeah, something like that.
Before I leave these slides, does anybody have questions about any of the data sources or any other suggestions?
I was just going to ask if the information from SCBI is through the Project Neon database. Is that
not that I'm aware
from? Or? Okay. Because yeah, I thought that's how they were mapping the land use changes, but
it might be. I'm not aware of that name, but could be. Because the let's see.
Yeah,
I mean the changing lands, the population projections and land cover implications information that the Smithsonian Changing Landscapes Initiative is providing. I think it's like 75 different data layers that we have received from them, a lot of them from USGS, that has been very, very helpful to all of this, that essentially they've been using to show if you have, it's kind of like almost a scenario builder type of thing, where if you have this population or make this set of land use decisions, they estimate that this is what your land cover will look like at X date. So it's been interesting.
Okay. Yeah, thank you.
Sure. So we hope to wrap up the data collection effort by the end of the year and then start phase 2. We received a National Fish and Wildlife Foundation small watershed grant that will begin officially in January, and it'll be a 2-year project. I'll go through what is specific to the watershed plan, but I will say that probably amounts to maybe a quarter of the grant. It's a $300,000 grant, and a lot of it is going to go towards efforts in Fauquier County, with stormwater BMPs at or near several of the schools within Warrenton, and also VCAP efforts at John Marshall Soil and Water Conservation District. So yes, there's a lot to this project besides just the watershed plan. So stay tuned for all of that. So again, this is a grant that we're partnering with Friends of the Rappahannock, the Chesapeake Conservancy, John Marshall Soil and Water Conservation District, the town of Warrenton, and Fauquier County on. And for the watershed plan, a large part of this is the Chesapeake Conservancy's efforts. We'll be contracting them to do a custom GIS-based prioritization of urban and agricultural BMPs for the region. So we'll be working with our Land Use and Environment Committee to select a subset of ag and urban BMPs for them to target what we see as the higher priority ones, maybe, I don't know, maybe a dozen BMPs or something like that. And work with them to determine what of that list they can actually use within their system. So they will be utilizing new land cover data and hydrography data and their BMP opportunity mapping efforts, all of which they have been working with the EPA Chesapeake Bay program on. So those data sets are things that are already funded through the Bay program or other efforts. The BMP opportunity mapping has been something that they've been working at in the lower Susquehanna, I think Lancaster County. And that in the past had been specific to the prioritization effort that they did for Lancaster was specific to ag BMPs, but they've been working on BMP opportunity mapping for stormwater BMPs as well to determine where on the landscape exists to be able to put various stormwater BMPs on using LiDAR technology. A lot of this effort, including the hydrography data, has been reliant on LiDAR. And I will say, if you go to their website, there is a webinar that goes through all of those data sets, and the difference between the old stream channel data and what they're working on now for the new hydrography data is like night and day. I mean, it is just amazing how specific it is. The old stream data looks like a child's crayon drawing compared to the level of detail in the new stream data. It is wonderful. So I think that will also really help our efforts. The intention is for this to be a web-based platform that will help both on the watershed planning level down to even potentially site-specific planning, so doing conservation plans or for easements, being able to help individual landowners with deciding which BMPs may be able to go on their land. So this is something that we really want all of our stakeholders' help in making sure that this is going to be useful for them. So again, this is part of phase 2. And then Friends of the Rappahannock will be contracted to ground truth the stream bank data from the Chesapeake Conservancy on a targeted basis, and also targeted water quality monitoring to be fed into the watershed plan. And then finally, their GIS staff will be digitizing the region's existing livestock exclusion fencing data based on both aerial photography and some of the data from Byron Petroskas from the old TMDLs. There's some information there that we've been able to get from him to be able to make this a little bit easier. Brian, is there anything, I think Brian was on the call. Is there anything you want to add about any of this? I noticed somebody from Friends of the Rappahannock had.
Yeah, I just dialed in. I'm driving through Gordonsville, so I'm in and out. No, we're excited about this, and it really builds off of the report card effort and some of the regional planning that's happening with some of the new TMDLs coming out, and the Headwater Stream Initiative with Piedmont Environmental Council, and all the folks working up in the region. So it'll be great to have this prioritized plan and kind of have some of the best new mapping technologies from Chesapeake Conservancy, putting it all together so it's a really usable tool for a variety of different folks.
Great. All right. And I think that's it. That's all I have. So is there any questions?
Okay, if nobody else has questions, I've got one, at least one. Listening to that whole discussion on data and privacy, that's not new. I mean, you know, it's come up a number of times over the last couple decades as we've worked our way through this. And my question is, and this is directed, I guess, first to you, Michelle, and to you, Deirdre, but then really to everybody, because everybody's got certain exposure to this. Is it, how do I want to ask the question? Is it worthwhile to have DCR lead a discussion where we try to more clearly define the protocols that accomplish, in my mind, two purposes? One, protect the privacy of private landowner information, because we're not getting anywhere if that's not almost first and foremost. But two, to provide the data that doesn't need to be protected freely so that proper planning can take place. So proper discussion and dialogue between the parties, recognizing that in order for that to occur, you got to do the first part. So my question is it worthwhile to have somebody directed to lead a discussion to better define our protocols, or are they well enough defined or as well defined as they're going to get?
I mean, I would love to see that happen. I don't know if, I mean, I will say that for our planning purposes, we have absolutely no desire to see people's names or phone numbers or how much they've cost share money they've gotten or any of that. I wish there was a state level protocol, to be perfectly honest, because it seems to me very odd that people who get septic cost share data, VDH releases that information, and those are private landowners. So it depends on which agency you're talking about, how they react to the privacy issue. It is not the same from one agency to another. One considers, since it's state money, it gets released. Others feel very differently, and it's it's a little disheartening, I guess, to say the least.
Right. And basically, I
NRCS
agree with
definitely
you, Michelle.
complicates it.
Yeah, because if it's public money, it should be public information. Yeah, it might be useful to have that conversation, but I see a mental roadblock. I mean, having worked with these people on the ground and in the field, and their perception of what's happening with their information is probably our biggest roadblock.
And Deirdre, to your point about not having the capacity at the district level to scrub the data to remove that private information, the state does. And we've got that BMP data with those 4 or 5 sensitive columns of information deleted. So I don't know farmer name, address, tax ID, anything. And we sat there with DCR on the phone, looking at shared screens and saying, I don't care about that. I don't care about that. And at the end of the conversation, every red flag from Daryl Glover was not on our list of data that we wanted. So that hurdle has been overcome. I care about the practice name, the linear feet / acres / whatever, and GPS coordinate of where it was installed, so I know which creek. And those are the 3 or 4 pieces of data that I think we all want here. And I don't have to know who said yes or no to conservation BMPs. I just want to know the practice and the numbers. And then again, the way that this data gets graphically displayed internally may have some points on a map, but never externally. You know, we're turning in a whole Huck 12 sub watershed, red, yellow, green, blue, whatever. And with the planning tool that Michelle is going to be developing, it's not going to be this landowner needs to get their stuff together and this one already has it. It's going to be, here's 18 miles of stream and these 500 linear foot sections need work. And
Yeah.
Michelle, add in there if I'm missing anything.
No, I mean, and I think it also, there's a big difference in my mind, at least, with whether this
We're losing you a bit, Brian.
whether this is being released to the public or whether this is being used by conservation organizations. Because the water plan, for example, is not going to be publicly available. It is only going to be used for our conservation partners that are actually, you know, working to install BMPs, our localities, the nonprofit organizations, our state and federal agencies. But I don't know. I mean, I think in my mind, something needs to happen, because even when you have the state's best interest at heart, or, you know, you want to do the right thing, it's a significant roadblock. It really is.
Right. And I understand that. And I am not trying to be an obstructionist. I am simply
no.
I am simply conveying the perception of the group that we're working with. Not only that, but within some properties, as you know, there are several levels and organizations that are involved. For example, there are grants through DCR, NRCS, whatever, and depending upon the complexity and the integration of those grant programs and those funding programs can also result in additional barriers to how we can share information. So, and I don't know all the ins and outs of all of these various properties and how one funding source interacts with another. And that might be a conversation we might want to have with Tom to, you know, clarify some of the finer points. But you can figure out by Google Earth a lot of this stuff. So I mean, it's not like rocket science, but I understand the details of it are important to you, but some of the things that you can extract even from a platform as ubiquitous as planet Earth, as Google Earth, I don't know if that occurs to some of the landowners that we're talking about.
Yeah, I mean, I think it really comes down to if just like trying to get the livestock exclusion fencing data digitized, there are ways around this. It's just time consuming. So yeah, we could find out exactly what Farmer Bob has. It's just to do for all of our farms. It's time consuming.
Yeah, I get it. I get it. I'm just the messenger.
No, I hear you, Deirdre. I'm not picking on you, but yes, Eldon, I think it would be helpful to have. I don't know if NRCS, though, is going to blow this whole thing up is the issue.
All right, well, before I go there, any other input from anybody else on this? All right. Anything we would try to do in terms of a state protocol isn't going to accomplish anything relative to NRCS.
Yeah.
NRCS is going to be NRCS, and we can
Yes.
all go jump in the river.
Yes.
And I mean, you know, and that's not going to change, and the state can't change that. And so we just don't even waste our time. Here's what goes through my mind. And John McCarthy from a previous lifetime may remember this, but SHEV, State Council for Higher Education in Virginia, has what's called the Virginia Longitudinal Data System. And it is this massive database on education. And every person touched by education and training in Virginia has data in the system, so that SHEV can analyze whether DSS's investment in workforce training for, I don't know, welders is effective. And they actually can produce reports that are amazingly detailed, but everything is totally de-identified. So if you're Western Virginia Community College and you need to see how effective your welding program has been when it's been funded by this source or that source or the other, the system can spit that information out. But the protocols are extensive, so that Western Virginia Community College doesn't have any information about any of the students who went through that program. But yet they can determine whether, hey, when we run the program this way, it's much more effective than when we run the program that way. And it's taken them matter of fact, it was started with Great Recession, when you had the federal money that went into all sorts of stuff. It was started back in those days, so the program's been around over a decade. My point in that is, Virginia's already figured out how to de-identify stuff, and the General Assembly has funded doing that so that we can make good planning decisions. This is not as complex as de-identifying all the K through 12 and higher ed and workforce development training programs in the state. I mean, it's just, this is the level of the degree of complexity is, a fraction. It just seems to me we could look to other programs in Virginia and identify protocols that the General Assembly would have never funded that program if there couldn't have been the commitment by SHEV that all that private information was going to be de-identified. General Assembly would have never established the program had that not have been ground one. So it's the same principle. Pardon me for expounding. When you see a problem and you see somebody else have already solved the same problem,
Right.
we can do this. And it doesn't involve any of the federal, because we can't affect that. This is all just state level.
I think one of the issues, Eldon, as I understand it, is that the ag data, what we're looking for has to include a lat long or GPS point. So thus you would know, generally speaking, what farm it may come from. And that's where the difference lies.
Like I say,
To not have the lat long is useless for us. Just
I hear you, but similar complexities in the education stuff were worked through and figured out.
yes. And I think that's a good model if that's the case.
Well, so my question then to the group is, would it be worthwhile to pose to the commission, to pose to our legislators a piece of legislation that would direct DCR to establish a work group to clarify data sharing protocols that protect private landowner information and facilitate good planning? Now that's just a,
Yes.
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 I got some yeses in the chat box too. All right, like, we'll have to work, that's just my penciled in, language.
Excellent.
Just bring everybody together and say, and have the General Assembly say in there, the first thing, protect private landowner information. Not that good planning is first, not that water quality is first, say that first, because if we can't get over that hump, we're not going to get there.
Right.
And my DEQ representative has said he likes it. So, okay. Thank you, Dave. Now we don't have anybody from DCR on here. I have to call Clyde and he'll probably call me back and tell me to jump in the river. I don't know.
Honestly, I don't think any of them are happy about this either. I mean, the bottom line is that they feel trapped between competing priorities and would love a way out, but they don't want to be the ones to lead on it. So maybe one of the virtues of our organization outside of that context is we can say it because they're not our masters. So,
and as I said, 10 minutes ago, this isn't new. I mean, we've been talking about this for, since the beginning since tributary strategies. But it's become more acute because we're getting down to a level of finite decision making in our planning to make good investment decisions of public dollars to get us over the hump for 2025. And so we could put it off in the past because we were dealing with higher level decisions. We're getting past that point now. So, all right.
Yes. Yeah.
I would, let me look at, Michelle, can you unshare your?
Yes, I can. Let me see.
All right. And hey, Pat, Cody, come off of mute and say what you just put in the chat.
Sure. Having heard all this, it belies, my instincts is it just seems like a problem that can be solved. Mm-hmm. And taking a simple step of convening someone to try to solve it and just not assume it can't be solved is kind of a no-brainer. So, I think we just ought to move ahead because I think you just articulated all the reasons why it's now important for the state and for this work. So, we should really try to address this and not just assume the answer is going to be no or unsolvable.
I thank you, Pat. I appreciate that.
And Eldon, this is Dave. I wanted to just say that I think DCR, having worked with our agency, with the NGOs, with the commissions, to be able to find a way to share the data, shows that they'll be a willing partner in this. I think it's a good suggestion.
And Dave, the critical thing for me is they not only have to be a willing partner, somebody's got to be willing to be the convener. And it seems to me DCR has to play that role. And do they feel like they have the resources to do that? Having had these similar kind of discussions with other agencies in the past, sometimes they resist it because they don't have the staff time.
Hey, Eldon, I think I've got enough service to talk again. This is Brian.
I hope so, because you're going to talk some more in a minute.
I'm pulling into Charlottesville, so I think I'll be all right. 6 months ago, we started these conversations, Michelle at DCR and my organization, trying to get more data, and got up to the AG's office, as Michelle mentioned, and to the secretary level with Matt Strickler, and headway was made. All of these points were made. Everyone was agreeing that it was a path forward in sight. But then, and this is what's going to be problematic for all of this altruistic thinking we have, DCR has managed to resurrect an older agreement with NRCS for an extreme amount of data sharing and collaboration that my understanding was taking place 15, 20 years ago. And maybe Deirdre, you can comment on how there used to be a lot of staff sharing, resource sharing, technical assistance sharing between the districts and NRCS in terms of engineers and things of that nature. And that had gone by the wayside for the most recent past. Well, they have reestablished that relationship, making any DCR data a part of the NRCS data and vice versa. And therefore, the same level of protection on DCR data, it has to meet the standards of NRCS data protection. So we convened a call with Daryl Glover, Roland Owens, and another guy who I think is on the DEQ shop side, sharing the BMP data from the 319 program. And we said, hey, we need that GPS point. What can we do? How many data agreements can we sign? You know, sell our mothers over as collateral that no one will ever see those outside of planning efforts. And there was a brick wall, and it went up to the secretary level of no. And what they would give us is all the data we wanted without a GPS point. They would refine it to a county. They would refine it to a HUC 12. They would do a lot for us that met what we needed for a report card, but is nowhere close to what Michelle needs for the watershed plan. And that's going to be hard because DCR is valuing that new reestablished relationship with NRCS above, I think, anything that we could come to them with requests for data and support from our organization. So not to throw a wrench in things, but that's the wall and explanation we got. And it's been a fairly consistent message from everyone we've talked to.
Okay, so in other words, it needs to go over the head of the Secretary's office. And we call that the General Assembly. I don't know. I hear you, Brian, and what you just described, it kind of puts things in a box. But I go back to what Pat said. You know, we're all smart people that know how to solve problems, and we just identified a problem that is a barrier for real sharp pencil planning. And we are at the stage where we're coming up to the 2025 targets, and this is a point where we got to have some real sharp pencil planning.
Yeah, exactly.
Agreed.
So
And
we just got to push back on it a little bit, and if it goes nowhere, it goes nowhere. But with the clear statement that if the General Assembly, if the governor's office, whatever it is unwilling to help us get to this refined data, they are tying the hands of the implementers that are wanting to be good partners to help accomplish the goal.
And Eldon, I will say that the situation is exactly the same with VDOF.
Yeah, I heard that.
So whether or not it's done simultaneously or not, it's the exact same issue.
This is Pat. Let me take an additional strategic view of this. We have in front of us a piece of work, an important piece of work, which is not accomplishing everything that it can accomplish. And that's kind of also a new data point for everybody. We now have something that needs to be addressed. And even if they reject it, I think we just shouldn't keep assuming that the answer is no. I think they should know that this is an issue which is not going to go away. If you don't solve it this time, you're going to solve it sometime in the future. And although it's not completely analogous, you know, one of my interventions in the region was George Washington Green Infrastructure Plan that Kevin Burns put together. And there was he was told and terrified to be very specific about the prioritization of the green infrastructure because it would affect landowners. And we ended up with something you couldn't implement. I just would hate to see us not at least put our hand up and say, hey, this is still an issue.
An unwillingness to refine the data is a barrier to cost effectiveness. That's what I just heard you say, Pat. Okay. Anything else folks want to add to that discussion? I'm gonna now have to have some conversation with our chairman and see how he feels about this, and if we're going to put this kind of discussion on the agenda for the commission meeting. But that's what these conversations are all about. So more to come. Any other comments before we move on?
Eldon, this is Dave again, not directly related, but just tangent that this evening is the public meeting for the Mountain Run, Muddy Run, Lower Hazel River implementation plan. So that's this evening at 6:30. If anybody on the call is interested and hasn't seen about that, just send me an email and I'll let you know.
Thank you, Dave. Appreciate that. Okay, with that, Brian, are you still with us?
Yep.
Can you want to tell us a little bit about what we are going to be talking about at the November technical committee meeting?
Yeah, most of the people on the call are familiar with the work done at the Smithsonian Conservation Biology Institute, the Changing Landscapes Initiative, and some of the Smithsonian Environmental Research Center. And they gave a presentation at a meeting hosted by Piedmont Environmental Council, I think it was a month ago, maybe a little more, about several of the research initiatives and projects that are happening in the Rappahannock River watershed as a case study. And they used that opportunity to solicit direction and data needs and next steps from the stakeholders who participated in that meeting, and expressed interest in expanding the audience that that presentation was delivered to expand their ability to get more data needs from on-the-ground practitioners, other organizations throughout the entire watershed, and wanted to give the technical advisory committee the opportunity to invite not people who don't always come to these meetings, and give them the opportunity to hear the work that's begun and the opportunity to contribute to kind of help steer the direction of some of that research, that are developing some super high level, excellent planning tools, and also the opportunity to discuss some of the other research initiatives that the Roundtable Partnership is supporting for the region.
Thank you, Brian. Questions for Brian? Okay. As I said at the beginning, that's going to be our main agenda item, November 18th. I would expect we will revisit to some degree the discussion we ended Michelle's presentation with. I'd like folks to, be thinking about that a little bit so we can see if we can refine that a little. I'm going to have a couple of conversations and see who else thinks that this is a good idea and who else thinks we're tugging on Superman's cape or something. That'll be November 18th. We pushed up a week because of Thanksgiving. And then the final River Basin Commission meeting of the year, December 2nd. As I said at the beginning, the chairman hopes we can do it in person. We'll see. We're going to try. And that would be at Meadow Event Park. And we'd have to be obviously not in the room we've met in the past several years. We'd have to be out in one of their larger venues where we could properly socially distance. With that, anything else for the good of the cause? Okay.
Hey, Brent, you want to update the tack on the boat trip yesterday?
Brent, you're on mute.
By the way, thanks, Michelle. That was a great presentation.
Morning. Quick update on the scenic designation status. As of yesterday, the eligible segments of the river have all been surveyed, and the scorecards indicate that DCR will judge those to be eligible for designation. Lynn Crump informed me yesterday when we got off the boat that she will be sending letters to the qualifying localities, those being all the way down to the end at Essex and Richmond counties. As of now, obviously, Middlesex, because Middlesex Board of Supervisors has not yet asked for the study, Lancaster County cannot qualify as well. So we did not survey Lancaster or Middlesex County for designation at this time because of that.
Hey, Brent, have you all talked to Jason Bellows about that?
I have not. I had a conversation with Hill Welford yesterday about that. I have not had a chance because literally this has just happened at 5:30 last night. I haven't even had a chance to talk with Brian about this yet. So
Okay.
we will reach out to him about that fact.
I recommend you do, because he was going to try to have some offline conversations with folks in Middlesex, and I have not talked to him further about those conversations, so I can't inform this discussion. Clearly, I'm going to be talking to him, but I don't want to get ahead of you guys. So I encourage you to talk with him, because he's really concerned that this be successful all the way to the mouth. And let's face it, he led the charge against Virginia Power and prevailed on that. So don't sell him short.
I assure you we are not doing so. And I can assure you there are many people who would love to see Middlesex County Board of Supervisors go that way. The conversation, I can tell you from what I understand, is not over.
That's good to hear.
It's just a matter of if it can be done, obviously, by the time we need this for the General Assembly.
Sure. Well, good. Thanks for that update. Anything else? Fantastic. Thank you, everybody. We'll see you next month, and enjoy your Halloween, and everybody vote.
Vote.
Amen. Yes,
Amen.
thank you.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody.